just want to highlight something here in chapter 5 that we must always go back to a first convention. Just something I think is quite important distinction that he makes. He says here a few lines down, he says, I see what may be termed an aggregation, but not an association. He's talking about this idea that if somebody who is really powerful and strong were to subdue a multitude of people and rule over them purely by force, that multitude of people would be an aggregation, but not an association. An aggregation would just be a bunch of individuals lumped together, but an association would be something different. It would be something like a real community. And so in a certain respect, what Rousseau is trying to do is to point out what makes the difference between a mere aggregation and an association. And clearly, he's pointing towards something that he calls a social contract, a convention, which creates a society. He's making fun of this claim by Grotius, previous author, that a people can give itself to a king, and he thinks that that's absurd because before a people can give itself to anybody, it has to become a people. So the question is, how does it actually become a people? He says it would be better before examining the act by which a people gives itself to a king to examine that by which it has become a people. For this act, being necessarily prior to the other, is the true foundation of society. Of course, he's leading up to something like convention, agreement, common consent, that mutual compact that Hobbes and Locke are both talking about. So, like Hobbes and Locke, Rousseau is looking for the foundation, the beginning of human political society in a kind of compact, an agreement, a convention, a coming together and making a mutual agreement between free individuals. And like Hobbes and Locke, Rousseau thinks that this is a necessary thing. He basically says here, at the beginning of chapter 6, that primitive condition can then subsist no longer, and the human race would perish unless it changed its manner of existence. That is, naturally, human beings, they live in a completely free way, without government, without any kind of law, official law. But that this is untenable, and that we have to create government. But the problem is, how do we create government without renouncing our natural freedoms? And this is the problem that he formulates at the top of page 3. Right here. The problem is to find a form of association which will defend and protect with the whole common force the person and goods of each associate, and in which each, while uniting himself with all, may still obey himself alone and remain as free as before. This is the fundamental problem of which the social contract provides the solution. Well, we'll have to see what that solution is, but you can see what he's trying to do. How can you have it both ways? How can you both have government, which requires law and to a certain degree force, as a force to back up the law, but at the same time maintain your natural freedom, and that he puts in this sense of how can you create a situation under law where you're still obeying yourself alone, and this is. His answer to that is in this idea of the general will, the volonté générale. That is, when we create we come together to create the what do you want to call it, the Leviathan in Hobbes's terms, the state, making this common agreement. He says on page 4, each man, in giving himself to all, gives himself to nobody. And as there is no associate over whom he does not acquire the same right as he yields others over himself, he gains an equivalent for everything he loses, and an increase of force for the preservation of what he has. What Rousseau thinks is that in the social compact, when we say, well, I agree to abide by a sovereign authority. I agree to abide by a common set of laws if you do too. The Rousseau idea is that in this creation of what he calls the general will, thereby, that you're not really losing anything, because you're basically saying that I agree to be ruled by what you agree to be ruled by. So no one is oppressing anyone else. That's the key here. He's trying to figure out a way to conceiving of government that is non-oppressive, where somebody's not exploiting somebody else, someone is not oppressing anyone else, where all power is mutual between individuals, so that in obeying the law, I am doing nothing but really obeying myself. That's the real trick.